Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Would our readers please take their places here in the inner circle?
Which ring is
It's,
that?
this is not Dante, and they are not in the Inferno. Welcome to the Dali Museum. Hi. Yes. It's just, okay. So this is the Dali Museum, as you know, and you have come tonight to celebrate Jack Kerouac, along with fellow impassioned readers and the livers of a kind of life that Kerouac described, aspired to, and left here in St. Petersburg. So, as we know, the end of the road is never the end of the story. Stories have their endings, and they're often the beginnings. And our hope for all of us here at the Dali Museum and our community is that we can go forward, that we can make more of St. Petersburg's relation to Jack Kerouac, and Kerouac's legacy itself can be amplified. So tonight we're going to have a program of readings. We're going to see a little video. We're going to see a wonderful film, parts of a film that's in preparation. And then we're going to ask you, as our participants, to advance ideas. We'll have a microphone, and we'll ask you to give your ideas on how we might accomplish this goal, that is to amplify Kerouac and to further develop understanding and celebration of his life in St. Petersburg and what that might mean. So we've asked a few people close to the museum to read, and we're going to hear tonight from Tom Hallock, Margaret Murray, Margot Hammond, Roger McClow, Lori Carpe, no, we won't hear from Lori, Jackson Willis, Frank Biafora, Bob Willis, and Christy Anderson. I've asked each of them to choose a passage or two from Kerouac that would set us in the mood. So first I would like to ask Tom Hallock, who Dr. Tom Hallock is a professor at USF St. Pete, and he read in 1985 On the Road. And as he says, it changed his life. I think it changed a lot of our lives, and it even cast forward a net of change that we would like to make in our lives. He teaches American and environmental literature, early American literature at USF St. Pete. And he says, if he were king of St. Petersburg, now that's not an unreasonable dream. He might be made king. He would take that house of Jack Kerouac's and he would pay for it in a standard transactional way, and he would move it to the USF St. Pete campus, and he would make it a writer's residence where Kerouac could be understood to be alive among young people here at the University of South Florida in St. Petersburg. I think that's a beautiful thing. And Tom, before you come up, I just want to say, if you do become king, would you do one other thing? Would you keep Mazzaro's open on Sundays? I think between those two things, we would have everything you could want. So please welcome Tom Hallock.
Can I? How do you read Kerouac when you're in your 50s? I think I'm 51. This is my college copy. I got this. This was the 25th anniversary, and when I was a kid, I thought it would lead to sex and drugs and parties and literature and writing. It led to writing. But one of the differences when you read it much older is that you start looking around the edges of the book. And one of the ways I love the way in which the things start falling apart. I think it's a better novel we give it credit for when we look at Dean and Sal, the main characters, with a little bit of ironic discipline and see how their worlds are falling apart. That night, Galatia, Dean, and I went to get Marie. This girl had a basement apartment, a little daughter, and it's hard to read in here, and an old car that barely ran, in which Dean and I had to push down the street as the girls jammed at the starter. We went to Galatia's, and there everyone sat around. Marie, her daughter, Galatia, Roy Johnson, Dorothy, his wife, all sullen in the overstuffed furniture as I sat in a corner. Neutral in Frisco problems, and Dean stood in the middle of the room with his balloon thumb in the air, breast high, giggling. "God damn," he said, "we're all losing our fingers." Har, 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 har. "Dean, why do you act so foolish?" said Galatia. "Camille called and said you left her. Don't you realize you have a daughter?" "He didn't leave her. She kicked him out," I said, breaking my neutrality. They all gave me dirty looks. Dean grinned. "And with that thumb, what do you expect the poor guy to do?" I added. They all looked at me, particularly Dorothy Johnson, lowered a mean gaze. It wasn't anything but a sewing circle, and the center of it was all the culprit, Dean, irresponsible, perhaps, for everything that was wrong. I looked out the window at the buzzing night street at the Mission. I wanted to get going and hear the great jazz of Frisco. And remember, this was my only night on the town. "I think Mary Lou was very, very wise leaving you, Dean," said Galatia. "For years now, you haven't had any sense of responsibility for anyone. You've done so many awful things, I don't know what to say to you." And in fact, that was the point, that they all sat around looking at Dean with lowered and hating eyes. And he stood on the carpet in the middle of them and giggled. He just giggled. He made a little dance. His bandage was getting dirty all the time. It began to flop and unroll. I suddenly realized that Dean, by virtue of his enormous series of sins, was becoming the idiot, the imbecile, the saint of the lot, the holy goof.
Thank you, Tom. So we're going to hear now from Margaret Murray. Margaret Murray is a vital and essential part of the St. Pete arts scene. She's on the board of the Kerouac House Foundation, and she also runs a program called Kerouac in Paradise, which is a bicycle tour that goes to the Kerouac House. And does it also visit certain bars in the city? Right. And Margaret has been a really critical part of developing the ideas for tonight's evening, and we really welcome her and her love of Kerouac. Please come forward, Margaret.
So I'm going to talk about when Dean and Sal first met. I first met Dean not long after my wife and I split up. I had just gotten over a serious illness that I won't bother to talk about, except that it had something to do with the miserable, weary split up and my feeling that everything was dead. With the coming of Dean Moriarty began the part of my life you could call my life on the road. My first impression of Dean was of a young Gene Autry, trim, thin-hipped, blue-eyed, with a real Oklahoma accent, a sideburn hero of the snowy West. In fact, he'd just been working on a ranch, Ed Walls in Colorado, before marrying Mary Lou and coming east. Mary Lou was a pretty blonde with immense ringlets of hair like a sea of golden tresses. She sat there on the edge of the couch with her hands hanging in her lap and her smoky blue country eyes fixed in a wide stare because she was in an evil gray New York. She'd heard about back west, about New York, and waiting like a long-bodied, emaciated Modigliani surrealist woman in a serious room. But outside of being a sweet little girl, she was awfully dumb and capable of doing horrible things. That night, we all drank beer and pulled wrist and talked till dawn, and in the morning, while we sat around dumbly smoking butts from ashtrays in the gray light of a gloomy day, Dean got up nervously, paced around thinking, and decided that Mary Lou should make breakfast for everyone and sweep the floor. In other words, we've got to get on the ball, darling, what I'm saying, otherwise it'll be fluctuating and lack of true knowledge or crystallization of our plans. Then I went away. During the following week, he confided in a friend of mine, Chad King, that he absolutely had to learn how to write from me. Chad said I was a writer and he should come to me anytime he wanted for advice. Meanwhile, Dean had gotten a job in a parking lot, had a fight with Mary Lou in their Hoboken apartment. God knows why they went there. And she was so mad and so deep down vindictive that she reported to the police some false, trumped-up, hysterical, crazy charge, and Dean had to land from Hoboken. So he had no place to live. He came right out to Paterson, New Jersey, where I was living with my aunt. And one night while I was studying, there was a knock on the door, and there was Dean, bowing, shuffling in the dark of the hall and saying, remember me, Dean Moriarty? I've come to ask you to show me how to write. And where's Mary Lou? I asked. And Dean said she'd apparently hoard a few dollars together and gone back to Denver. The whore. So that's Jack and his relationship with women. So we went out to have a few beers because we couldn't talk like we wanted to talk in front of my aunt, who sat in the living room reading her paper. She took one look at Dean and decided he was a madman. In the bar, I told Dean, hell, man, I know very well you didn't come to me only to want to become a writer, and after all, what I really know about it, except you've got to stick to it with the energy of a Benzedrine addict. And he said, yes, of course, I know exactly what you mean. In fact, all of these problems have occurred to me, but the thing that I want is the realization of these factors that should one depend on Schopenhauer's dichotomy for any inwardly realized, and so on in that way of a young intellectual who doesn't really know what he's talking about. Although, mind you, he wasn't so naive as that and all other things, and it took him just a few months with Carlo Marx to become completely in there with all the terms and jargon of the intellectuals. Nonetheless, we understood each other on other levels of madness, and I agreed that he could stay at my house till he found a job, and furthermore, we agreed to go out west sometime. That was the winter of 1947.
Thank you, Margaret. Wow, imagine. Man, Jack Kerouac had to use a campfire for that. Margaret, nice reading, thank you, nice selection. I failed to mention that Margaret is also a development officer at the Museum of Fine Arts, and lest I be accused of leaving that out, our sister institution there down the street, it has a great person in you. Thank you for being part of this evening. So, we had the happy experience of meeting Roger McClow recently. He came to a planning meeting about this event, and he's a part-time resident of St. Pete. He's worked as a labor attorney and lives part-time in Detroit. And in his youth, as many of us, he pursued that life. And he additionally collected Jack Kerouac books. And he has almost a complete collection of Kerouac's publications. Generously, he brought them tonight and put them on a table here to look at. But I'm advised that we're also going to be serving pizza. So we're trying to keep those two things separate. If you have pizza, please don't handle his books. But anyways, it's terrific to have you here. And I think you also emulated Kerouac's journey across this beautiful country. And you hitchhiked across the United States. Oh, that's fantastic. So he is highly qualified. Please come forward.
Okay, well, I don't read much here, so we'll see how this goes. This is intended to bring this home a little bit to the museum. So we'll see if I can do that. This is from Desolation Angels, and he wrote that, part of it in 1957, just before On the Road was published, and he talks about getting the box of books on the road. in this. This is, and it's about Mexico City and about Washington and California. But this is a little bit from when he was in New York. I'm going to read parts of this. It'll be a little disjointed, but it's important for the development of this. Anyway, it starts out, Denny Blue is that fantastic character I lived in the West Coast in my road days, who stole everything in sight but gave it away to widows sometimes, and who was now living meanly, I'd say, in an apartment on 13th near the waterfront with an icebox in which he nevertheless he still stored his homemade special recipe chicken consomme. Now, Denny Blue was on the road. He was Remy Boncourt, and he lived he said Mill Valley or Mill City, but it's actually Marin in actuality. But he had met Kerouac at Horace Mann in 1939 when they went to school there. So later on in this paragraph it says, so I'm giving you this genuine vicuna coat as soon as with this razor blade I cut out the very important fur lining. And then he said, I said, Denny, do you expect me to walk around the streets of New York with a coat hanging to my shoes? Not only do I expect that, he said, putting a woolen ski cap on my head and yanking it down over my ears, but I expect you to keep stirring those eggs like I told you. So wearing Denny's huge vicuna coat with the ski cap over my ears in cold biting winds of December, New York, Irwin, who is Allen Ginsberg, and Simon, who is Peter Orlowski, led me up to the Russian tea room to meet Salvador Dali. He was sitting with his chin on a finely decorated tile-headed cane, blue and white, next to his wife at the cafe table. He had a little wax mustache, thin. When the waiter asked him what he wanted, he said, 1 grapefruit, pink. And he had that big blue eyes like a baby, a real Oro Spaniard. He told us no artist was great unless he made money. Was he talking about Uccello, Franca? We didn't even know what money really was or what to do with it. Dali had already read an article about the insurgent beats and was interested. When Irwin told him in Spanish we wanted to meet Marlon Brando, who ate at the Russian tea room, he said, waving 3 fingers at me, he is more beautiful than M. Brando. I wondered why he said that, but he probably had a tiff with old Marlon. But what he meant was my eyes, which were blue, like his, and my hair, which is black, like his. And when I looked into his eyes and he looked into my eyes, we couldn't stand all that sadness. In fact, when Dali and I look in the mirror, we can't stand all that sadness. To Dali, sadness is beautiful. He said, as a politician, I'm a royalist. I would like to see the throne of Spain reborn, Franco and others out. Last night, I finished my latest painting using a pubic hair for the final touch.
Yes, Roger, thank you for connecting us that way. We weren't really sure how they fit together, except that they were, something wonderful for St. Petersburg to celebrate. But now we know. There's a hair's breadth between them. Margot Hammond has been a book editor for the St. Pete Times. She's also been on the WMNF program called Book Babes. Yeah, Book Babes. I wanted to be very careful before I uttered that. Book Babes. And she's the founder of the St. Pete Festival of Reading. She's also been very useful in starting some scholarship programs here at the Dali Museum, programs in scholarship. So, Margot, please read for us.
Well, I'm going to bring Jack Kerouac here to St. Petersburg. He actually wrote, even though a lot of people see his time in St. Petersburg as an endless trip to bars, he actually was writing here. I had a friend when I first came to St. Petersburg 20 plus years ago who knew Jack Kerouac. He was his designated driver. He was a musician. His name is Ron Lowe, and he taught me a lot about Jack Kerouac. And one of the things he told me about was these two last books that he wrote, Satori in Paris and Pick. I'm not going to read from Pick because Pick was kind of an unfortunate novel for Jack Kerouac. He wrote it in black dialect at a time that it was not a very cool thing to do. And he went to a black bar and read out loud from it and got beat up. And some people say that's really was the end of Jack Kerouac. He never quite recovered from his being beaten up in that bar. So Pick is his last novel. But I'm going to read from the penultimate novel, which is really kind of a happier circumstance. It was when he went to Paris for 10 days. It's called Satori in Paris. And I'm going to first read you the introduction to give you a little bit of an idea of how he saw this book. Somewhere during my 10 days in Paris and Brittany, I received an illumination of some kind that seems to have changed me, again, towards what I suppose will be my pattern for another 7 years or more. In effect, a satori, the Japanese word for sudden illumination, sudden awakening, or simply kick in the eye. Whatever, something did happen, and in my first reveries after the trip, and I'm back home regrouping all the confused, rich events of those 10 days, it seems the satori was handed to me by a taxi driver named Raymond Bayet. Other times I think it might have been my paranoid fear in the foggy streets of Brest, Brittany at 3 a.m., Other times I think it was Monsieur Casteljaloux and his dazzlingly beautiful secretary, a Breton with blue-black hair, green eyes, separated front teeth, just right in eatable lips, white wool knit sweater with gold bracelets and perfume. Or the waiter who told me, Paris est pourri, Paris is rotten. Or the performance of Mozart's Requiem in Old Church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, with elated violinists swinging their elbows with joy because so many distinguished people had shown up, crowding the pews in special chairs, and outside it's misting. Or, in heaven's name, what? The straight tree lanes of Tuileries Gardens, or the roaring sway of the bridge over the booming holiday Seine, which I crossed holding onto my hat, knowing it was not the bridge, the makeshift one at Quai des Tuileries, but I myself swaying from too much cognac and nerves and no sleep and jetliner all the way from Florida, 12 hours with airport anxieties or bars or anguishes intervening. As in the earlier autobiographical book, I'll use my real name here, full name in this case, Jean-Louis Lebris de Kerouac, because this story is about my search for this name of Raymond Bayet. Because this story is about my search for this name in France, and I'm not afraid of giving the real name of Raymond Bayet to public scrutiny, because all I have to say about him, in connection with the fact that he may have caused my satori in Paris, is that he was polite, kind, efficient, hip, aloof, and many other things, and mainly just a cab driver who happened to drive me to Orly airfield on my way back home from France. Now, a little bit later in the book, I want to read this passage because he has gone to Bretagne. He's trying to find his roots back in France. He, of course, was a Cajun. And this is when he's coming back into Paris after this time in Bretagne. And all night, alone in an old passenger coach. Oh, Anna Karenina. Oh, Mishkin. Oh, Rogoshin. I ride back, Saint-Brieuc, Rennes, got my brandy, and there's Chartres at dawn, arriving in Paris in the morning. By this time, from the cold of Bretagne, I've got big flannel shirt on now with scarf inside collar, no shave, pack silly hat away into suitcase, close it again with teeth. And now, with my Air France return trip ticket to Tampa, Florida, eyes ready as the fattest ribs in old Winn-Dixie. And then finally, he gets back to Tampa, and he has this encounter with the cab driver. And I just want to read the very last part of that. The cab driver takes him in the cab. He begs him to stop for a beer. He finally relents, and the cab driver lets him have the beer. And they, in fact, have a beer together. And then he says, he tells me his name of Auvergne, I mine of Brittany. At the spot instant when I know he's ready to fly, open my gullet and let a half bottle of beer fall down a hole, a trick I learned in Phi Gamma Delta fraternity. Now I see for no small reason. Holding up kegs at dawn and with no pledge cap because I refused it, and besides, I was on the football team. And in the cab we jump like bank robbers, and zam, we're going 90 in the rain, slick a highway to Orly. He tells me how many kilometers fast he's going. I look out the window and figure it's our cruising speed to the next bar in Texas. We discuss politics, assassinations, marriages, celebrities, and when we get to Orly, he hauls my bag out the bag and I pay him, and he jumps right back in and says, in French, not to repeat myself, me man, but today, Sunday, I'm working to support my wife and kids. And I hear what you told me about families in Quebec that had kids by the 20s and 25s. That's too much. That is me, I've only got 2, but work, yes, yowza, this and that, or as you say, monsieur, this and that. In any case, thanks, be of good heart, I'm going. Adieu, Monsieur Raymond Bayet, I say, the Satori taxi driver of page 1. When God says, I am lived, we'll have all forgotten what all the parting was about.
Thank you, Margot. The lovely selections. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that in. Oh, man. Yeah, about the pork chops. Incredible. During my time here in St. Petersburg as director of the Dali Museum, I've been joined in fellowship and in an energy to create a more enlivened St. Petersburg by Frank Biafora, who's Dean, Dr. Frank Biafora, who's Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at USFSP. And he's forged, not only with the Dali, but with a lot of other organizations in town, ways for faculty and those institutions to collaborate and make this a better place. And he's been part of these conversations that Dr. Hallock mentioned to, and Margaret has been involved in, to try to bring this house somewhere, hopefully close by here, USFSP would be great, so that it can be used as a kind of place for that satori, for that sudden enlightenment. I'm always really encouraged by that phrase, that sudden enlightenment that Kerouac talks about, which is this perpetual renewal which attracts us all. You know that? He writes, I'm so excited and sweetened by this morning world. And that's the state of mind I think that we all aspire to. Anyways, Frank, thank you for working on this project with us, and I understand that you didn't have your glasses tonight, so you're not reading. Yeah. But as a scholar, now, a lot of us as administrators get pushed away from our scholarship, but Frank is a scholar, and he's done a lot of research and publications, and you found a very interesting thing on YouTube that we're going to look at. Is that correct? Frank?
Thank you, Hank. Before I present the video clip, just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. And it was about a year and a half ago that Tom Hallock invited me on a bike ride. And he said, I would like for you to meet a friend of mine, Margaret, who was putting together a Friends of Jack Kerouac ride, and we're going to start out at the Flamingo Bar. Well, I was relatively new to town. I had not been to the Flamingo Bar. And I can tell you that I had to throw away my clothes after I left the Flamingo Bar because the dry cleaners could not get the stink out. But be that as it may, I learned about the history of Jack Kerouac in St. Petersburg. I was unaware of that at the time. And as Dean of Arts and Sciences, I'm always looking for opportunities to partner and to explore how the University of South Florida St. Petersburg can be an engaged citizen within St. Petersburg. So this guy right here, who stole my thunder, right? So after I took that bicycle trip, and there are hundreds and hundreds of people, and I learned about the numbers of people who go out to that residence and they drop notes in the mailbox before they take a journey. I said, there's mojo in this town. There's something very special about Jack Kerouac in this town. Can we somehow harness that as a community and do something with it? Just like years ago when the idea about bringing the Dali art to St. Petersburg of all things, right? Somebody thought about it. It was a great idea, and here we are today. And so I want to thank you all for coming out today and to facilitate the conversation we're going to have in a couple of minutes. But as an educator, the students keep getting younger and younger, and I keep getting older and older. And so, which was the Generation Xers, then became the millennial generation, and now the Generation Y students, everything's online. And so my thought was, what is online about Jack Kerouac so that the younger people who are going to be introduced, what will they see? And I was saddened to say that when you go through what the young people are going to look at, first thing they're going to do is going to go to YouTube. You see a very drunk Jack Kerouac can barely string 2 sentences together. My concern, it's very sad commentary, my concern is that a number of people, that will be their first exposure to Jack Kerouac. And so, in flipping through, I have 2 6-year-olds, they're always on YouTube floating around, and I found a video clip of a Steve Allen special from 1959. Steve Allen's at the piano, and he interviews Jack Kerouac, a young Jack Kerouac, just like this. And I'd like to share that with you, if we could cue that up.
In the early 1950s, the nation recognized in its midst a social movement called Beat Generation. A novel titled On the Road became a bestseller, and its author, Jack Kerouac, became a celebrity, partly because he'd written a powerful and successful book, and partly because he seemed to be the embodiment of this new generation. Jack and I made an album together a few months back in which I played background piano for his poetry reading. And at that time, I made a note to book him on the show because I thought you would enjoy meeting him. So here he is, Jack Kerouac. Jack told me a little earlier he was nervous. Are you nervous now? No? Good. Jack, got a couple of square questions, but I think the answers will be interesting. How long did it take you to write On the Road?
3 weeks.
How many?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? Jeez, that's amazing. How long were you on the road itself?
7 years.
7 years. And I was on the road once for 3 weeks, and it took me 7 years to write about it. Or the other way around. I've heard that you write so fast that you don't like to use regular typing paper, but instead you prefer to use one big long roll of paper. Is that true?
Yeah. When I write narrative novels, and I want to change my narrative thought, I keep going.
You don't want to change the pages at the end, you mean?
100-foot-long teletype paper.
Oh, teletype rolls. Where do you get them?
Huh?
Where do you get the paper?
Yeah, teletype paper.
I mean, where do you get it?
In a very good stationery store.
I see.
When I write my symbolistic, serious, impressionistic novels, I write them in pencil.
Oh, yeah? I've seen a lot of your poetry written in pencil, but I didn't realize that's how you worked on the prose stuff.
For narrative, it's good.
Yeah,
Keep going.
I got the most hard question of all, but everybody always puts it to you, I'm sure. I mean, because everybody always puts it to you. How would you define the word beat? I don't mean why not time. I mean, really, is there...
Well, sympathetic.
Sympathetic? All right, I ask. Well, about this point, naturally, we plan to have Jack read some poetry. And while looking again through his book the other day, it struck me, it occurred to me all over again, that his prose is extremely poetic. I think it's probably more poetic than that. Who else writes poetic type prose? Thomas Wolfe, I guess.
Walt Whitman.
Uh-huh.
In Specimen Days. Walt Whitman in Specimen Days.
I see. I thought you were putting me on there for a minute. All right, we'll look into that. And right now, we'll look into Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and he'll lay a little on you. You know, you don't even have to buy these pages. I'll try it. I'll play the blues as we did in the thing, and we'll see how it works out.
Well, a lot of people have asked me why did I write that book or any book. All the stories I wrote were true because I believed in what I saw. I was traveling west one time, at the junction of the state line of Colorado, its arid western one, and the state line of poor Utah, I saw in the clouds huge and massed above the fiery golden desert of evenfall, the great image of God with forefinger pointed straight at me, through halos and rolls and gold folds that were like the existence of a gleaming spear in his right hand, which saith, "Come on, boy, go thou across the ground. Go moan for man. Go moan. Go groan. Go groan alone. Go roll your bones alone. Go thou and be little beneath my sight. Go thou and be minute as seed in a pod. Go thou, die hence. And of this world report you well and truly." Anyway, I wrote the book because we're all gonna die. In the loneliness of my life, my father dead, my brother dead, my mother far away, my sister and my wife far away. Nothing here but my own tragic hands that once were guarded by a world, a sweet attention, that now are left to guide and disappear their own way into the common dark of all our death. Sleeping in me raw bed alone and stupid, with just this one pride and consolation, my heart broke in the general despair and opened up inwards to the Lord. I made a supplication in this dream. So in the last page of On the Road, I describe how the hero, Dean Moriarty's come to see me all the way from the West Coast just for a day or two. We've just been back and forth across the country several times in cars, and now our adventures are over. We're still great friends, but we have to go into later phases of our lives. So there he goes, Dean Moriarty, ragged in a moth-eaten overcoat he brought specially for the freezing temperatures of the East, walking off alone, and last I saw of him, he rounded the corner of 7th Avenue, eyes on the street ahead, and bent to it again. Gone. So, in America, when the sun goes down, and I sit on the old broken-down river pier watching the long, long skies over New Jersey, and sense all that raw land that rolls in one unbelievable huge bulge over to the West Coast, and all that road going, and all the people dreaming in the immensity of it. In Iowa, I know by now that children must be crying in the land where they let the children cry. And tonight the stars will be out, and don't you know that God is Pooh Bear? The evening star must be drooping and shedding her sparkler dims on the prairie, which is just before the coming of complete night that blesses the earth, darkens all the rivers, cups the peaks, and folds the final shore in. Nobody knows what's going to happen to anybody besides the forlorn rags of growing old. Think of Dean Moriarty, I even think of old Dean Moriarty, the father we never found. Think of Dean Moriarty, I think of Dean Moriarty.
Yeah, wow, Jack. Thank you very much. Jack Kerouac. It's a kick. Right now, I'd like to have a word.
Well, that was wonderful. So, one of the great things about the era was its youthfulness, and we're really fortunate that we have a member of a youthful generation here with us tonight. Jackson Willis has had a special relation to the Dali Museum. He has been an intern here, and he did a wonderful project creating a Dali calendar at one point, and we had the pleasure of working with him every day. Then, unfortunately, he went off to a school in New Haven, Connecticut, where he was admitted to the Dean's Humanities program at Yale. And he's come back. He finished his finals last night, and he's come back to read a couple of selections. Now, you heard Jack Kerouac say, is there any precedent to this? Is there any precedent? Did he say Walt Whitman? Did you hear Walt Whitman? He said Walt Whitman. And Jackson has chosen some passages from Whitman and some passages from Kerouac for us tonight. Please welcome Jackson Willis. Great to have you back. Congratulations.
I've been reading Whitman, wrote Jack Kerouac in The Dharma Bums. Walt Whitman and Jack Kerouac were distinct individuals with much in common, refusing to work, forgetting regular meal times, randomly leaving for hours or days, and ignoring the world to write. As you saw in the Steve Allen video, Kerouac doesn't name a contemporary example of good poetic prose, but instead names Whitman's 19th century collection of autobiographical fragments titled Specimen Days. In Specimen Days, Whitman writes, "Chalk a big mark for today," was one of the sayings of an old sportsman friend of mine when he had unusually good luck, come home thoroughly tired, but with satisfactory results of fish or birds. Well, today might warrant such a mark for me. Everything propitious from the start, an hour's fresh stimulation, coming down 10 miles of Manhattan Island by railroad, an 8 o'clock stage, then an excellent breakfast at Pfaff's, 24th Street. Our host himself, an old friend of mine, quickly appeared on the scene to welcome me and bring up the news, first opening a bottle of the best wine. And now, Jack Kerouac. I said, "Hold on just a minute. I'll be right with you, soon as I finish this chapter." And it was one of the best chapters in the book. Then I dressed, and off we flew to New York to meet some girls. As we rode in the bus in the weird phosphorescent void of the Lincoln Tunnel, we leaned on each other with fingers waving and yelled and talked excitedly. And I was beginning to get the bug, like Dean. He was simply a youth tremendously excited with life. And though he was a con man, he was only conning because he wanted so much to live and to get involved with people who would otherwise pay no attention to him. He was conning me, and I knew it, for room and board and how to write, etc. And he knew I knew. This has been the basis of our relationship. But I didn't care, and we got along fine. No pestering, no catering. We tiptoed around each other like heartbreaking new friends. I began to learn from him as much as he probably learned from me. As far as my work was concerned, he said, "Go ahead. Everything you do is great." He watched over my shoulder as I wrote stories, yelling, "Yes, that's right. Wow, man, and phew." And he wiped his face with a handkerchief. Man, wow, there's so many things to do, so many things to write. How to even begin to get it all down, and without any modified restraints, and all hung up on like literary inhibitions and grammatical fears. That's right, man. Now you're talking. I'd say there's a rhythm to our culture that connects the great narrator poet and our beatnik king, the spirited curiosity of travelers, the kinetic experiences connecting friends, the infectious excitement of pursuing the pulse of life,